අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නායට වටිනා tab computer සහ data දීමනා. අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නායට වටිනා tab computer සහ data දීමනා.
පැස් සබන් බිලිඳ සම්ට විශේෂයෙන්ම නිෂ්පාදිතයි. SLS ප්‍රමිතිසාධකය සහිතයි.
Tonight, adding fuel to the fire. Sri Lanka tells the UNHRC that its methods can only worsen the situation.
Sri Lanka once again reiterates its view that the evidence gathering mechanism is unhelpful, will polarize Sri Lankan society and adversely affect economic development.
Ramping up. Fears of escalation rise after report of Russian armoured convoy heading towards Kiev. In time of need, Ukrainian tourists get visa extensions as local hoteliers set up to help with free accommodation. Watchful and waiting. Local tea and rubber exporters weighing on the impact of the Ukraine crisis.
If the crisis is not resolved in the near future, it could definitely affect the tea prices in the long term.
We will also see price escalations of further for raw materials and energy. So these are going to impact our production cycles and product.
All that and much more coming up on First at 9, this Tuesday, the 1st of March, 2022.
100ක් දක්වා ඉසොරි නැති 100ක් සුසිනිඳු කෙස් කලමක් ලබා දෙයි. Dove Anti-Dandruff.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammik Kanai. Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Peters today addressed the United Nations Human Rights Council ahead of Sri Lanka having to face the report presented by UN Human Rights Commissioner Michelle Bachelet later this week. During his address, the Foreign Minister rejected what he termed punitive, politicised and divisive methods used by the Council to gather evidence against Sri Lanka on alleged war crimes. He added that such methods would only serve to polarise the country by digging up old wounds.
The United Nations Human Rights Council's 49th sessions commenced yesterday with a report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights tabled, highlighting several areas of concern. In it, Human Rights Commissioner Michelle Bachelet has cited multiple areas, including the government's use of COVID-19 measures to restrict the freedom of peaceful protests, including those conducted by people discontented with Sri Lanka's current economic situation and government policies. In addition, she also takes up the issue of the lack of transparency within the country's Independent Human Rights Commission, which was downgraded to B status by the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions due to a lack of transparent and independent appointment process, lack of plurality and diversity, and the failure by the HRCSL to independently and effectively exercise its human rights mandate. The High Commissioner has also called for the country's draft constitution to be made available for public consultation and debate before being presented to Parliament. In addition, she also highlights the continued use of Gazette notifications under Section 12 of the Public Security Ordinance that authorises recourse to the armed forces in police functions. This, she says, has led to a disproportionately high number of military checkpoints in the northern province and complaints of discriminatory treatment or harassment during security checks, particularly for women. Further, she also touches on the activities of the Task Force for Archaeological Heritage Management in the Eastern Province that has imposed restrictions on land use in certain areas on the basis of environmental and forest preservation, which minority communities fear is being used to change the demographic landscape of the region. With that, she has also expressed concerns over actions by the government during the past year that have reinforced the nexus between Sinhalese nationalism, Buddhism and the state, and increased the sense of marginalization and anxiety among Tamil, Muslim and Christian minority communities. Bachelet also took aim at the presidential task force appointed to formulate a framework and make recommendations for the implementation of the concept of one country, one law, namely the appointment of Venerable Galagoda Atteññanasaratera, the leader of the Bodu Bala Sena, a Buddhist extremist organization known for its anti-Muslim rhetoric and hate speech. The report also highlights the continued pattern of surveillance and harassment of civil society organizations, human rights defenders and victims that was highlighted in previous reports, particularly for those in the country's north and east. Further, Bachelet has also expressed concern over the government's recent public responses to human rights advocacy by well-known and respected civil society representatives and its conflation with LTTE propaganda as well. In this backdrop, Sri Lanka seems to have quite a bit to challenge at the 49th sessions. Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Piris, who addressed the sessions today, expressed the Sri Lankan government's rejection of what he termed methods that go against the Council's mandate to assist governments in an impartial, objective and non-selective manner based on the sovereign equality of member states.
The multilateral architecture for the implementation of human rights was progressively developed in the last decades. Consensus was forged on key principles which we consider sacrosanct, such as that the promotion and protection of human rights should be guided by the principles of impartiality, objectivity and non-selectivity based on the sovereign equality of member states. In March 2021, the Council voted on Resolution 46/1, which was tabled without the consent of Sri Lanka as a country concerned. The consideration of this matter polarized and politicized this forum. In a startling departure from the mandate which the UN General Assembly originally conferred on this Council, Operative Para 6 of this resolution refers to a so-called evidence-gathering mechanism, a measure that was strongly opposed by a number of countries. Such initiatives create disharmony both in the domestic and in the international arenas. It creates obstacles to reconciliation efforts, breeds hatred by reopening past wounds, and polarizes society. Mr. President, member states have mandated this Council and its Secretariat with a truly extensive array of helpful working methods to assist governments in the promotion and protection of human rights. Sri Lanka has participated actively and constructively in those aspects of the Council's work. We reject, however, those that are punitive, politicized, divisive, unhelpful, and initiated due to extraneous reasons.
Further, the Foreign Minister also took aim at the OHCHR's evidence-gathering mechanisms, explaining that this would be unhelpful to the people of Sri Lanka and will only serve to polarize Sri Lankan society by opening up old wounds.
We take particular objection to the use of voluntary funding, which has the necessary consequence of undermining objectivity and detachment. Against this background, Sri Lanka once again reiterates its view that the evidence-gathering mechanism established under Operative Para 6 of Resolution 46/1 is unhelpful to the people of Sri Lanka, will polarize Sri Lankan society, and adversely affect economic development, peace and harmony in my country at a challenging time. It is an unproductive drain on member state resources at a time of severe financial shortfalls across the entire multilateral system, including the High Commissioner's office.
The Cabinet of Ministers last night approved a proposal by the Ministry of Tourism to provide a free 2-month visa extension to Russian and Ukrainian tourists stranded in Sri Lanka due to the ongoing conflict between their countries. In addition, with restrictions on banking services also compounding their problems, Sri Lankan hoteliers have stepped up to offer free accommodation for Ukrainian tourists, proving that Sri Lanka lives up to its reputation for hospitality.
The conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues to escalate, leaving the country's travelers stranded at their holiday destinations across the world. With that, yesterday we reported on the plight of Ukrainian tourists in Sri Lanka, who are urging the government to offer them some relief. Their initial request to the government was for some understanding in the form of a possible free visa extension. Speaking to AdaDerana English News yesterday, Tourism Minister Prasanna Ranatunga revealed that the issue was to be taken up at last night's cabinet meeting. Today, at the official announcement of cabinet decisions, it was revealed that the cabinet had unanimously approved the cabinet paper presented by the tourism minister. With that, Ukrainian and Russian tourists in Sri Lanka numbering over 15,000 can now get their visas extended by 2 months at no charge. However, with restrictions on banking services having been imposed, the stranded tourists are also facing down the issue of dwindling finances to fund their stays in the island. With that, in a move that affirms Sri Lanka's position as the most hospitable tourist destination, some Sri Lankans have stepped up to support them, especially Ukrainian travellers. Social media posts by several guest houses and hotel operators were seen offering free accommodation to them. The posts were by operators located all across Sri Lanka in places such as Sigiriya, Nuwara Eliya, Habarana, Negombo and Ambevela. Further, other operators around the country's southern coastlines too have jumped in to help as well, pledging their support during the challenging times and echoing the message that they are never alone during this crisis. This is a heartwarming gesture from Sri Lanka's hotel operators, who just months ago were facing a major threat to their very existence during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The Director General of the Sri Lankan Association of Manufacturers and Exporters of Rubber Products says that the Russian-Ukrainian conflict will not have a direct impact on the country, but will affect production costs. Speaking to AdaDerana English News, Rohan Maskoral said that the impact of the war on the rubber sector could be directly on the production costs, as the prices of raw materials and energy are expected to soar. However, tea industry experts don't share the same view, as they say that unless the war diffuses fast, tea prices in the future could be severely affected.
The impact of the ongoing war in Ukraine has reached out to almost every country in the world. For developing countries like Sri Lanka that are trying to recover from the severe blow dealt to their economies from the pandemic, the current Ukraine crisis is a cause for concern. The concern shifts especially to some of the main exports of Sri Lanka, such as tea and rubber, to the two nations embroiled in conflict at present. Tea is one of Sri Lanka's primary exports, with Russia being one of the third highest export destinations of the commodity. Last year, 27.3 million kilograms of tea were exported to Russia, while 4.2 million kilograms of tea were exported to Ukraine as well. In 2020, the quantity of tea exported to the Russian Federation stood at 29.6 million kilograms, while 4.5 million kilograms were exported to Ukraine in the same year. Similarly, the export of rubber and rubber finished goods to the Russian Federation in the year 2020 had been valued at $7.62 million. However, the war in Ukraine has forced its airports to be closed, restricting any inbound flights, while Russia has been severed from the world. Russia's decision to invade Ukraine prompted Western countries to slap a whole host of sanctions, with the latest including the removal of some of the country's banks from the SWIFT global banking network. Experts in Sri Lanka's tea industry believe that even though it is still too early to ascertain the situation, the impact from the conflict could potentially harm tea exports in the future.
I'm sure if the crisis is not resolved in the near future and if they don't go for peace talks, it could definitely affect the tea prices in the long term. Tea being a food item, maybe it is essential, so we are not too sure whether they will take the food items and maybe not take the others. So we are also looking at this very closely. We saw a major devaluation in the Russian currency, which was around 84 rubles to a dollar just before the war erupted, and it went up to 178, and now it has come down to 106. But there is a high percentage of devaluation, and also this is definitely going to affect the prices in the long run. And with regards to the payment terms, as at now, maybe the SWIFT relationship has been sanctioned on 5 banks only. Those are some of the state banks. So of course we will find that there will be a lot of delays for compliance sake for monies coming from Russia. Some of the Russian major buyers are trying to send money through Germany and using euro as it has not been sanctioned yet.
Speaking to AdaDerana English News, Director General of the Sri Lanka Association of Manufacturers and Exporters of Rubber Products, Rohan Maskoral says that since Russia and Ukraine are major markets for Sri Lankan rubber products, there might not be a direct impact.
The basic problem we see with the Ukrainian war is both this Russia and Ukraine are not major markets for our rubber product exports, but we will have indirect impact if the war escalates. Supply chain disruptions can happen in shipping and transportation sectors, as well as we will also see price escalations of further for raw materials and energy. So these are going to impact our production cycles and product, both imports and exports, because we do have import components as well as export component to the said region via Europe. We have this situation developing which we are closely monitoring. Our major markets are Europe, United States for exports, but since Europe is involved in this whole operation, we may see supply chain disruptions. We may have a situation where our exports can get affected in the coming months. The war escalates.
We'll see you shortly. Bear with us.
Big 3.
welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, members of the public in the past few days had to wait in long lines outside refuelling stations across the country as a shortage of diesel and petrol loomed. However, according to the Ministry of Energy, a ship carrying 37,000 metric tons of diesel is scheduled to arrive in Sri Lanka tomorrow and may provide some relief towards the latter part of the week.
As the country grapples with an ongoing power crisis, it looks like a fuel crisis is beginning to threaten further challenges to daily life as well. This poses a major threat to the country's vital lifelines, namely bus, rail, vegetable and container transport as well. Long queues are seen at filling stations across the country today, especially at Ceylon Petroleum Corporation run sheds. People were also seen waiting for hours outside some IOC filling stations in attempts to get their hands on petrol and diesel. Meanwhile, it was reported that residents in the Mahavela area in Tangol had reportedly been forced to wait in queues from morning until the afternoon for diesel yesterday. In the afternoon, when a diesel tanker truck finally arrived with the stock, people received it with cheers and fireworks as well. Meanwhile, also affected by the fuel issue are the country's fisher community. Due to this, about 30 fishing boats have not been able to set sail from the Dolandua fishing harbour as they usually do on a daily basis. Further, vegetable traders say that there has been a marked decrease in vegetable deliveries into Colombo due to the diesel shortage. Traders at the Manning Market in Paliagoda say that the supply of vegetables has dropped by about 50%, threatening to further compound public problems. Meanwhile, according to the Ministry of Energy, a ship carrying 37,000 metric tons of diesel is scheduled to arrive in Sri Lanka tomorrow, and the ministry says that the process of opening the required letters of credit has already commenced. Further, a ship carrying 28,000 metric tons of diesel and 9,000 metric tons of jet fuel is scheduled to arrive in the island on Friday, the ministry added. This could provide some relief to the public towards the end of the week.
Meanwhile, the Cabinet of Ministers has decided to give the long-term contract for the importation of 1.8 million barrels of petrol to the OQ Trading Limited of the United Arab Emirates. The contract is effective between the 15th of February and the 14th of October this year.
A host of decisions taken during the weekly cabinet meeting were published today. The cabinet has given the go-ahead to recommence production activities at the Ambalipitia paper mill belonging to the National Paper Company Limited. Even though the factory had been closed off since 2012, the land and the buildings belonging to the factory were approved to be handed over to a local investment company, Korean Spa Packaging Private Limited, for 30 years. Measures are also being taken to provide a further 111 acres to the National Paper Company Limited on a long-term lease basis. As such, the Cabinet of Ministers approved the proposal by Minister of Trade to recommence production at the paper mill under private-public partnership subsequent to entering into an agreement comprised of conditions agreed between the National Paper Company Limited and Korean Spa Packaging Private Limited. In addition, the Cabinet also gave the go-ahead for the payment of an evaluation incentive allowance for farmers using green agricultural inputs during the 2021-2022 Maha season. A methodology has been prepared to compensate farmers to the amount of 25 rupees per kilogram of paddy based on certain criteria as an evaluation incentive limited to an extent of agricultural area to the maximum of 5 acres. Further, after calling for international bids for the design, supply and installation of transmission lines and sections under package number 4 of the Reliability Strengthening Project for the Asian Development Bank funded power system, the project was handed over to the China Machinery Engineering Corporation. This was after a cabinet-appointed Standing Procurement Committee made the recommendation to do so. Meanwhile, the cabinet also gave the green light to 38,500 metric tons of muriate of potash fertilizer used by farmers in paddy cultivation and distributed through the government fertilizer subsidy program. In the meantime, the Cabinet, in accordance with the recommendations of the Cabinet-appointed Standing Procurement Committee, approved a proposal presented by the Minister of Energy to award a long-term contract for the importation of 1.8 million barrels of petrol for a period of 8 months starting from the 15th of last month until the 14th of October to the OQ Trading Limited of the United Arab Emirates. Further, in a much-anticipated move, the Cabinet also gave the nod for the extension of visas of Russian and Ukrainian tourists in Sri Lanka for 2 months free of charge, as they are unable to return due to the ongoing conflict between the two countries.
The tenure of the One Country, One Law Presidential Task Force was extended for a period of 3 months by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa yesterday. This was announced in a special Gazette notification issued by the head of state using powers vested in him by Article 33 of the Constitution. The tenure of this presidential task force, which was established on the 26th of October 2021, was slated to come to an end yesterday, the 28th of February. However, the president has taken the measure to extend its term in order for it to complete its assigned tasks within an appropriate action plan and to seek the views of the public and the panels of experts in all provinces of the island. Now then, Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, looks to be readying itself for a spike in violence after a massive Russian armoured convoy stretching back 65 kilometres was spotted making its way towards the city. Meanwhile, at the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions today, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov explained that the reason for the invasion was to prevent the appearance of nuclear weapons and related technologies in Ukraine.
Russia's assault on Ukraine continued for a sixth consecutive day as the invading forces fired rocket barrages into the center of the country's second largest city, Kharkiv. Following the attack, the Ukrainian Interior Ministry advisor said that the rocket strikes on the center of Kharkiv killed at least 10 people and wounded 35. Meanwhile, satellite imaging captured a Russian military convoy stretching back 65 kilometers that had amassed on the outskirts of Ukraine's capital amid fears that invading forces were set to launch devastating assaults to take control of Kyiv. The column covers the entire road from the near Antonov airport outside Kyiv to the town of Pribyrsk. In the meantime, the United States has ruled out enforcing a no-fly zone on Russian aircraft over Ukraine after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged Western nations to consider such a measure to stop any further bombardment by Russia. In a video address, Zelensky said Russia had launched 56 rocket strikes and fired 113 cruise missiles in the past 5 days since the start of the war on the 24th of February. Zelensky, who did not specify how and by whom a no-fly zone would be enforced, accused Russia of committing war crimes and said it should be brought before an international tribunal. In response, Russia banned airlines from 36 countries from using its airspace. As response to the ban of European states on Russian air carriers, a restriction has been introduced to the operation of flights by air carriers from 36 countries. These restrictions will affect airlines from Britain, Germany, Spain, Italy, Canada and Portugal, among others. For 6 straight days, the real reason behind the Ukrainian invasion had been speculation, with the most stated one being Russia's displeasure in the Ukraine veering too far into NATO's reach. However, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov explicitly announced that the invasion in Ukraine was to simply curtail the possible threat of nuclear weapons in its neighboring country.
Western countries must not build military facilities in the territory of the former Soviet Union states that are not part of the alliance and should not use their infrastructure for any military action. Ukraine still has Soviet technologies and the means of delivery of such weapons. We cannot fail to respond to this real danger. Russia, as a responsible member of the international community committed to its obligation of non-proliferation of mass destruction weapons, undertakes all necessary steps to prevent the appearance of nuclear weapons and related technologies in Ukraine. It is very important to refrain from dangerous actions in forced development, which could be understood as violating the principle of equal and indivisible security. Russia stays open for initiatives of multilateral talks on preventing the arms race and strengthening the strategic stability. We believe that such ideas should be implemented based on consensus and taking into account the legitimate interests and concerns of all possible participants. Business confidence in Sri Lanka has defied expectations and moved up by 2 points to end up at 124, a 10th-month high. This brings the index 4 notches higher than a year ago and a healthy 15 points above its 12-month average of 109. Now, according to the LMD Nielsen IQ report released today, this could mean that the people are learning to live with COVID-19 and that the fear that it commanded in the past has diminished.
Sri Lanka's business confidence index edged up by 2 basis points from the previous month to register 124 in February, which represents a 10-month high. According to LMD Nielsen IQ's report released today, this means that the unique index is 4 notches higher than a year ago and a healthy 15 points above its 12-month average of 109. As for other comparisons, the BCI is now only 2 points shy of its all-time average of 126, and it has gained momentum since the pandemic surfaced in April 2020, when the index stood at 93, and it hovered around the 90 mark when the second and third waves of COVID-19 induced lockdowns and travel restrictions took effect. This is the third month in succession that the barometer has headed north, despite the state of the economy, the forex crisis, ongoing shortages of essentials, and an on-off power scenario. Nielsen IQ's Director Consumer Insights Terika Mianadeni explained that in spite of rising COVID-19 cases, life seems to go on, and businesses and the people are learning to live with the virus, and the fear that it has commanded in the past has diminished. She also noted that inflation has taken over from the fear of COVID-19. In terms of sensitivities, the daunting prospect of global shocks, including the already spiraling price of fuel and the Ukraine-Russia-West standoff, will have oil and other markets across the world running for cover, the report says. In conclusion, the report says that the business community may continue to adopt a longer-term stance if, at the very least, there is a resolution to the forex crunch in sight, and for that to materialize, there's a collective call for debt restructuring measures to be adopted.
Russia will deploy up to $10 billion from its sovereign wealth fund to buy up battered local stocks after sweeping international sanctions shuttered the nation's markets. Under the plan, the Finance Ministry may hire financial organizations to carry out the purchases on behalf of the $174.9 billion National Wellbeing Fund. The announcement, a government meeting came today by Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, harks back to the tactics devised during the 2008 global financial crisis when Vladimir Putin held the post of Prime Minister between presidential stints. Foreign listed shares in Russian companies extended their route today as investors sought to unwind billions of dollars of holdings. In response, the central bank has introduced capital controls and banned foreigners from selling securities locally, effectively shutting the exits for investors. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.